In this video, I'm going to show you how to easily track your graphics into live action footage and some really easy techniques to make it match the environment seamlessly. Let's start in a comp with our footage. I've got this lovely shot of this stream in a forest, which I downloaded for free from Mixkit.co. And now let's add our graphics by dragging it in from our project window. And we've got an animation of my logo here. You could use text or even some keyed out green screen footage, whatever you want, the same techniques apply. Now let's get this tracked into our scene. So with our footage layer selected, let's select the tracker over here on the right. If you can't view the tracker in your workspace, you can access it through Window and select Tracker down here. Let's double click Track Camera. And it adds this effect to our footage, and you can already see it started working. We've got this band across our footage which tells us that After Effects is thinking really hard about this footage and trying to extract some 3D data about how the camera is moving. We can open up the Advanced menu and select Detailed Analysis. And that means After Effects will just analyze the footage a bit more carefully and give us a more accurate track, but it'll take a little bit longer. And you can see up here on the left how much time is remaining. Now this method of tracking is really quick. This 6-second clip took maybe 30 seconds to analyze. Now we're done, and we can see it's added these tracking markers all over our footage. Let's hide our bat for a second, and if we scrub through the timeline, we can see these tracking markers are stuck to our objects in the scene. So it looks like our track has worked. So let's turn back on our bat layer, and let's select Create Camera. And now we have a virtual camera in our timeline. But nothing has changed yet because we don't have any 3D layers. So let's select our bat layer and make it a 3D layer by clicking this down here. And as soon as we do that, it disappears. But let's play back our footage and see where it went. There we are, we've got our bat tracked into our scene. The position is not where we want it to be though. But you can see we've got these extra handles here. So we can click and drag this and move it across the X-axis, the Y-axis, up and down, but also in the Z-axis. So we can move it forwards and backwards. And if you hold Shift on your keyboard and push it backwards, it moves it a little bit faster. It moves it 10 times as much as it does by normally clicking and dragging. And let's just push it right back into Z space. And let's increase its scale quite a bit. I want it kind of sitting parallel with this tree here on the left. Maybe a bit further in front of that tree is fine. There we are. Now our bat is in the physical space where we want it to. But how do we make it look like it belongs there? Because right now it kind of sticks out and it's really obvious that it's just a graphic that was placed over the top. So we need to use a few compositing techniques to make it match the background and just make it feel more at home. The most important thing we need to consider is color correction. We can see that there's a lot more contrast in this graphic. The black in here is a lot more darker than any black in the scene here, and the whites are brighter too. And because this is a black and white graphic, it's really easy to adjust this by adding the tint effect. And what the tint effect does is change the black and white values of a layer. So where it says up here, map black to, and then we have a color, let's select our eyedropper and select a dark spot in our scene, over here somewhere. And that changes the black on this layer to match what we've selected. Let's choose one for the white as well, maybe somewhere up here in the sky. There we are. And that's already fitting in much better. If we turn that on and off, we can see the difference that makes. You could also use the curves effect if you were working with a graphic that had a lot of colors and you wanted to match the contrast that way. Our graphic is really sharp here as well, much more in focus than the other areas around the same depth in our footage. So let's add a Gaussian blur effect and let's increase that to maybe 6. It doesn't need to be much, this is pretty subtle. And let's keyframe that by clicking the stopwatch. And at the end of our scene, let's increase that a bit more to maybe 10 because it's now further away from the camera and would be less in focus. Now let's add a noise effect. And our footage here isn't particularly noisy, but it does have a little bit, so we don't need much. Let's add maybe 10% noise. And that'll just make it so that these flat areas of black and white have a bit more of a grit and noisy texture to them, and won't stand out as being much cleaner and flatter than the background elements. Wonderful. Now let's add a bit of this element into our scene as well with a reflection. Let's duplicate this layer with Ctrl+D, and let's flip this layer upside down by selecting Layer, Transform, Flip Vertical. And then slide it down on the Y-axis so it's below the water here. And let's rename that to Bat Reflection because we always label our layers. Let's select our rectangle tool up here and create a mask by just drawing over this top section of our layer here and press F on our keyboard to bring up the mask feather and drag that out so we get a nice smooth gradient as our reflection fades off. And you can adjust this to show more or less of the reflection, depending on how reflective your surface is. There, we've got the start of our reflection. Now on this reflection layer, we're going to add another Gaussian blur effect. But for this one, let's change the blur dimension to just vertical and push that up to about 50. And let's get rid of this other Gaussian blur effect because we won't notice that underneath this one. And move the noise to the bottom as well. So it's applying the noise after the blur. And we also want to match the ripples of the surface of the water here with some distortion. So we're going to distort it with the effect turbulent displace. Let's pop that above our noise as well. And the first thing we need to do is change the displacement from turbulent to horizontal displacement. Let's increase the amount pretty high, maybe around 470. And let's change the size pretty low, maybe down to 4. Maybe a bit higher, maybe 5's good. Use your own judgment and match the kind of size and the ripples of your footage. Actually, maybe let's animate the ripples in this reflection. Let's keyframe the evolution at the start here, and at the end, drag that up pretty high. And then let's see how that looks. That's looking a bit better, just a bit more movement in these ripples. Reflection done. And I've got a bit more of an in-depth reflection tutorial on my channel as well if you're interested in learning some more reflection techniques. This video is sponsored by Mixkit. Mixkit is a free online library of high quality stock videos, music tracks, and Premiere Pro templates. 100% free for personal and commercial use. You don't even need to sign up. You can just find a clip you like, click download, and you can be using it in your client project within seconds. The library is huge, and new video assets are being added every single week. It's where I got the footage for this tutorial. It's really easy to search by category, and there are a ton of footage that are perfect to use as mats and backgrounds in motion graphics projects. The music library is fantastic. I wish this had existed when I was doing more client explainer videos. So many of the tracks are perfect and completely royalty free. Their Premiere Pro templates are great too. I don't spend an awful lot of time with graphics in Premiere, so I didn't even know that Premiere could do half of this stuff. I really like their Instagram story templates, which I think are a great starting point, not only for clients, but for promoting your own work on Instagram. You could download these, tweak the fonts to suit your own style, and then you've got a system ready to go where you can just plug in your own work, your own animations, and share it on Instagram stories looking really professional. Mixkit is now the first place I look for any stock video or music. It's free, there's no sign up, there's absolutely nothing to lose. It doesn't get better than that. Click the link in the description and start creating today. Now let's add a bit of light spilling onto our bat from the environment. So let's duplicate our original bat layer, and let's rename that bat spill, and let's add a fill effect, and let's eyedrop a bit of a nice rich green color from the environment, something like that. And then select our pencil up here, and we're going to draw a rough bean shape over the top of this layer like that. And we need to invert that mask. So let's press M on our keyboard and select inverted down here. So now the green is just touching the edges. So let's press F on our keyboard to bring up our mask feather like we did the reflection and increase that a fair bit. Let's go up here to maybe 300 or so. And then let's grab our mask and just move the edges so it just touches the top left and the bottom right edge. Now, if we turn this on and off, we can see we just get a bit of green light reflecting that would have just bounced off these leaves and the rest of the forest. You can be pretty subtle with this, and it just helps place it in the scene a little bit more. And now let's add a really obvious reflection of the surrounding environment. Let's grab the spill layer and duplicate it. And I'm going to call this bat matte. And I'm going to change the color as well to purple and hide it because we're going to use that layer as an alpha matte soon. So let's duplicate our footage layer, Control D, bring that underneath our matte, and over here where it says track matte, change that to alpha matte. So now we can see our footage is visible on those feathered edges of our bat here. And that becomes really obvious if we select our arrow tool and just drag this footage around. We can see it's restricted to just the edges of our bat's bubble. Now, I don't want this to look like our bat is see-through. So what I'm going to do is open up our rotation properties and just rotate this 180 degrees. So it's completely upside down. And let's just move it around a touch, because we really only want the color and movement in this layer. We're not worried about the exact details inside it because we're going to blur and distort it. So let's add a Gaussian blur. Let's put this up to maybe 20. Maybe that's too far, maybe 15. And to get it to sort of wrap around this object, which we want to appear like a sphere, we are going to add the effect bulge, which adds a distortion inside this circle guide that's now added to our layer. So let's first go to the very first frame of our timeline and try to position this in the middle of our bat. And let's increase the horizontal and vertical radius so it pretty much aligns with the outline of our bat's bubble. There we are. And we can see that there's some slight distortion happening on the edges, like a magnifying glass. But this is going to look much better once we increase the bulge height. So let's drag that from 1 all the way up to 4. Now we can see this looks a lot like a sphere. That's great, but now when we play our clip, we can see our bulge is kind of slipping away. That's because this circle, our bulge center, is not track to our 3D camera in any way, so it slips off. But because this camera move is so smooth, we can easily adjust that manually. So let's click on the stopwatch for horizontal and vertical radius and bulge center as well, which creates a keyframe. If we press U on our keyboard, we can see we've got 3 keyframes added to this layer down here. And then we'll move to the very end of our scene and then just drag the center, move it back over to the middle of our bat and decrease the horizontal and vertical radius so it aligns with the edge of our bubble. And then if we play that back, we can see it kind of slips a little bit as well towards the middle. So let's find somewhere in the middle and then realign it, just moving the center and adjusting the radius. Now you could do this more places throughout your timeline. The more you add, the more accurate it will be. So you might move over here and just drag the center over a bit to the left. And then at the front here, a bit to the left as well. But for this scene, I think this is fine. Now I'm going to change the blending mode of this footage from normal to screen, just so it's only adding light values and it doesn't darken up this reflection on the top left any more than it needs to. One last thing to do is add some color adjustment to the whole scene. So let's add a new adjustment layer. I'm going to call that grade. And I'm going to add the hue and saturation effect, increase the saturation a touch, and also add the curves effect, and maybe tweak the blue channel a bit, maybe just to bring a bit more blue into these shadows. There, that's pretty subtle, but it's really good to make these subtle adjustments over the top of everything in your scene. The more things that you can add to your scene which brings your graphic element and your original footage together, the more it's going to look like they're connected. It's all the little details of lighting and color that make a composite successful. Individually, they might not do much, but combined together, they can make all the difference. Please take a deeper look through this project file, which is available to download for free down in the description. And I'd love to see your graphics tracked into a scene, so make sure to tag me on Instagram with anything you create. I've made a short playlist of some related videos that I think you'll enjoy if you've made it this far. I'll see you in the next video, and please consider subscribing if you'd like more of these videos every week.